evening, everyone, and welcome to the RISE FundN'Go inaugural webinar. Very excited to have everybody join us in what's going to be a very, very exciting and informative and impactful discussion. My name is Dr. Bahijja Raimi Abraham, and I'm going to be moderating tonight's webinar. We're going to now move on to our panelists, and we're joined by panelists from PwC, MIT, and Diverse Tech, who will be discussing the importance of supplier diversity programs and how they deliver innovative and commercial advantage. So I'd really like to start and kick us off with panelist introductions. So if we start off with Rebecca, if you'd mind introducing yourself and letting us know who you are.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. Yes, my name is Rebecca Ormond. I work for PwC in the UK, where I am the firm's inclusive workplace leader, running both our diversity and inclusion team and our wellbeing team, recognising that there's a real connection between people's wellbeing and the extent to which they feel they belong at work.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Rebecca, for that introduction. Annette, over to you.
So hi, my name is Annette Joseph. I'm the founder of Diverse and Equal. I've been working in and around tech for about 30 years now. My last role that I was in up until a couple of months ago was as a delivery manager and agile coach at the Co-op. I worked on digital transformation projects across the business, including retail, recruitment and data. And for 2 years, I served as the chair of the Co-op's network for colleagues from Black, Asian and minority ethnic backgrounds. Funnily enough, it was called RISE. And I started Diverse and Equal with the aim of increasing diversity, especially in the North tech sector, after becoming tired of seeing less and less people that looked like me as my career progressed and as I became more active in the Manchester tech scene.
Lovely. Thank you so much for that introduction, Annette. And last but by no means the least, Katie.
Hello, everyone. My name is Katie Date. I am from the MIT Center for Transportation and Logistics. I've been in this role for about 7 years. Prior to coming to MIT, I was in industry in supply chain for about 10 years. In my role at MIT, I wear multiple different hats, including leading our corporate outreach program and working with our international centers across the world. The capacity that I'm here with you today, though, is as the founder and leader of our Women in Supply Chain initiative at CTL. Recently, along with one of my colleagues, Dr. Alexis Bateman, and one of our students, we published an article in the Harvard Business Review based on research that we've done around supplier diversity and inclusion. This research included lots of interviews that we did with companies and diversity organizations. So I'm really excited to be able to discuss some of that research with you here today.
Thank you so much, Katie, and thank you once again to all our three panelists just for taking the time to come and speak with us today and to just engage with this very, very important topic. So I'm just going to kick things off with our first question. So how is the question of supplier diversity actively being discussed amongst your industry peers? And I'm going to ask Rebecca, and just with a bit more of a focus, is this a discussion that's being held at present? And perhaps what sparked your your interest in this initiative?
So yes, I think it is an issue that is being discussed amongst my peers, but I think there are really two buckets. You know, if you look at people who work in diversity and inclusion, we broadly fall into kind of two groups. There's a kind of origin that has its roots in the people functions and in creating diverse organizations internally. And there's a group that is focused really on people's markets typically, and quite often sits in the marketing function, really thinking about how products and services resonate and feel relevant to very diverse customers or clients. And I think the conversation has typically been different depending on where you come from. And I think from those of us who come from people functions quite often are coming to the question of supplier diversity a little bit later. I personally sit somewhere in the middle, in that my background's around culture change and how you change cultures overall. And for me, that means your organisation needs to look the same outside as it does on the inside in terms of its intentions and its values and its purpose. So if you're really committed to building an inclusive culture in your organisation, why wouldn't you ask the question about where you're spending your money as an organisation? And that's what takes you to supplier diversity. So I think different organisations are at different places on that journey, quite often to do with where they started the diversity and inclusion conversation. But I do think it's a really important topic for us to start to engage in, because we know through research like the research The Missing Millions that's been done on gender by the 30% Club, that there's an enormous amount of value to attract, both for organisations but also globally for countries, if we actually engage properly in reaching all sorts of different communities, both as suppliers, as customers, and as talent. So I think it's the next stage in the conversation for many of us.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. So very powerful comments there, and really enlightening also to hear from the PwC perspective, sort of what you're doing on your focus. So thank you for that. Annette, moving over to you, and I just want to again just angle the question a little bit more within your work. How would you, as a founder of Diverse Tech in itself, find diverse supplier benefit from a supplier diversity program?
So I've got two companies. So one of them, the main company is Diverse and Equal, and Diverse Tech is our training arm. And that's a not-for-profit. And being part of a supplier diversity program would really help us to have a greater impact in spaces that are currently inaccessible to us. It would provide us with the opportunity to scale our work, while we in turn empower organisations to be more profitable, more innovative, and realise the many, many proven benefits of diversity. And we currently work with SMEs quite a lot. And although we're able to empower change there, the potential for greater social impact is so much bigger in a larger organisation.
Thank you so much, Annette. Katie, I just want to move over to you. So just as a reiteration for the audience, Katie's connecting with us from America, the United States. So supplier diversity in the United States, from my understanding, goes back as far as the 1950s. So how would you say that this has matured to date, and what is on the horizon?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think initially when supplier diversity and inclusion was brought forward as an initiative for companies in the 50s and 60s, it was more out of a feel-good, like corporate social responsibility, and was really looked at as an add-on, not a revenue generator, not something that's really going to drive the business forward, but just something like, we need to do this to look good, to be very candid. But we've really seen a shift in that. Companies are really seeing the value in having diverse suppliers. Particularly, a lot of the conversations that I'm having right now are with companies who during COVID-19 were able to call on these diverse suppliers, which are often smaller, and they were able to be a lot more agile. A lot of the stories that we heard, one comes to mind of somebody who was able to come through huge for one of our companies because they were able to pivot from making hair care products to hand sanitizer. Another vendor was able to pivot from being an events company to all of a sudden they were setting up tents in Central Park and setting up these mobile clinics, and they were so easily able to shift because they're smaller, but also because they're part of the local community. And so they have this added investment in what's happening for their community, and they're able to kind of go above and beyond.
Thank you so much. And I would just say I really appreciate the honesty that all of the panelists have given in this topic so far, because I think all of you have sort of highlighted the importance of just let's talk about this in a very honest fashion and highlight sort of the challenges within the space. So moving on, here I want to just really focus on how would you articulate the value proposition of supplier diversity? And if you don't mind, Annette, I'd like to start with you. And we talked about you have, so you've got your parent company and the not-for-profit. So perhaps you could answer the question with both of those perspectives in mind. So what would you say is your unique selling point, especially relating to your position as a diverse supplier?
I think for us, I think what's unique about us is that all of us have lived experience of issues due to lack of diversity and inclusion in tech specifically, although the issues are largely the same in other sectors too. So me personally, I know what it's like to be marginalized within a work environment. It's happened many times in different places. And so I recognize what it looks like. I'm able to pick up on the nuances, trace the negative impacts of bias on people's sense of self and their well-being, and also know the steps I've taken and the steps that I've helped others take to turn situations around. This lived experience is crucial into finding lasting solutions to problems. So while it might be tempting for organisations to want to tackle the current urgency for action by signing up to a programme that ticks a box, and I invite them to seek to include people who are on the ground. It's like what Katie was saying, the people who are in the community are the ones that actually know what's going on. They're able to move fast, they're able to pivot. And we are where it's important that organisations try to find the people who are already doing the work. So our main focus as a business is tech, but in this day and age, isn't every business a tech business? McKinsey's reports state a 21% uplift in profit for tech organisations. So that's us moving away from a focus on, I guess, on the feel-good factor, and going more into the business, actual tangible business benefits of diversity. So there's 21% uplift in profit for tech organisations that are gender diverse. And when you start looking at ethnic diversity and pulling that into the mix, it's like 33 to 35%. And we can't afford to ignore that.
You're right. And also the conversation around tech and advancements of tech, especially in this time, COVID-19, it's been well reported. So, thank you for highlighting and making that connection as well. You mentioned Katie, so I'm actually going to move over to Katie. So within sort of the core question, what kind of data from your research can be tracked or monitored to really demonstrate the benefits to organizations around that sort of value proposition of supplier diversity?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's one particular study that I think for me was really interesting. It was a 2019 study that a company called Hootology did. They're a diverse supplier themselves. They did this study for Coca-Cola, and they found that individuals who are aware of Coke's supplier diversity initiatives, which they've been doing for decades, were 45% more likely to perceive the brand as valuing diversity and 25% more likely to think favorably about the brand. And almost half of them were more likely to purchase the products. So when you're able to take that data and go and sit at a table, which is one of the things that we're really advocating for, we want these diversity and inclusion programs to have a seat at the procurement table and show that for your brand, there is a tangible profit impact on your brand by having these initiatives. And I think with the current Black Lives Matter movement in the United States, I think that's only going to become more and more important for companies across the board. They have to show that they care, or they're going to lose customers.
Yes, exactly. Thank you for that. And Rebecca, again, with this within the theme of value proposition and supplier diversity, so I'm sure that many will be unaware of maybe what it is and how it could benefit their business. So it'd be really helpful if you could just share from your perspective how you're framing the return on investment in PwC, in your organization.
So I think there are two things that we really think about when we talk about supplier diversity. One side of that is we're a large organization, and therefore when we're working with any of our suppliers, how can we be having a conversation about diversity and inclusion, and actually also asking them what they're doing around their own diversity and inclusion agenda? Because we want to ensure that any organization we work with is bringing their best. But our clients are asking us the same question. So in the time that I've been working in diversity and inclusion, we've seen requests from our clients about our approach to diversity and inclusion getting more and more significant, including who we spend money with and who are our suppliers, and are any of those women or minority ethnicity owned businesses. So you're seeing, to Katie's point, not just customers in the kind of business to consumer space, but all the way through to the professional services and client service area, people saying this is important to us. It's also important for us as a business that fundamentally kind of sells services through which are delivered by people, because future talent is not prepared to work for an organization that isn't serious about diversity and inclusion. And that is about who we employ, but on top of that, it is also about how we behave end to end. And so we're also seeing, to Katie's point, questions about, well, what do we do in this sort of space? And I think they'll just continue to grow. And I'm sure that companies that articulate how they're working around diversity and inclusion across that spectrum, from internally to things like supplier diversity, will see the same kind of impact that is highlighted in the study that Katie highlighted.
Thank you so much for that. And I find interesting in sort of your response as well as Katie's, is Katie mentioning, you know, having that seat on the table. And Rebecca, I find it interesting where you mentioned that it's almost a turnaround where your clients are asking you, you know, what's going on, and maybe we'll start to see more of that with other businesses as well. So now I just want to let's look at sort of success stories and teachable moments. So I'd really like to have a discussion around success stories, teachable moments from your respective organizations or your experiences that can be applied across industries. And Rebecca, I'll come back to you. In your immediate efforts, what would you like to share that has gone well so far? You can also share what hasn't gone well. And are there any lessons from what you've already learnt along the journey?
I think for me, and we're on a journey ourselves as an organisation, but I think there have been two kind of early lessons that don't actually just apply to supplier diversity, but apply to diversity and inclusion overall. And the first is, you can start small with what you can influence. So I sit in our people teams, which means I have really close relationships already with our L&D function and some of our other people teams. So some of the early questions we were able to ask were, who comes to us and works with us as a coach, and how diverse is that mix? Where are we sourcing leadership development from? Because actually we shouldn't inadvertently be saying that there is one type of leader. So actually you've got things that are really proximal to you that perhaps you have direct influence over wherever you sit in an organisation, and you can start there. But actually the second piece, to Katie's point, is what's your collaboration with your procurement function? Because actually, obviously, that's where a lot of the buying power and activity is happening in your organisation. So actually, as you grow and develop, you need to really be collaborating with them. And it's the same, you know, for all diversity and inclusion activity. If you really want to shift a culture, you need not to be just in the HR space, but working with sales and marketing, working with procurement, and working across the organisation to really drive that culture shift throughout. So those are the two lessons that I would say. You can start small as you know what's in your gift, but actually as you grow, how do you engage other players in your organisation in this and build capability there?
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Rebecca. Annette, I just want to come to you again with that sort of looking at success stories of teachable moments, and in particular, maybe as it relates to how you're selling your services or making the case for consideration or tendering challenges. If you could maybe just into that a bit.
So for us as a startup business, I guess one of our biggest constraints is time. So there's only two of us, and we've got a couple of contractors and some volunteers. And so although I know that there are programs out there, it's not easy finding out about them. And even when you do, the application processes are long and require even more time. So one of the ways that we've been circumventing that wait time is so that we can get working immediately, is to partner with a consortium. So we've just finished the first phase of a piece of research on ethnicity and culture in tech, working with Greater Manchester Tech Collective, which is a collection of organisations and social enterprises, and the funds actually come through the Co-op Foundation. In the new year, we'll be kicking off another piece of research with a consortium that Leeds City Council is pulling together, which will work in a similar way, and we'll be working with WILD for that. We're also currently finalising a partnership with a government agency. We're sponsoring places on our 2021 data science and black coding bootcamp for your up accelerator and the landing. And these consortiums help us to get access to the funds so that we can quickly get to work without the burden of a protracted procurement process.
Thank you so much for that, Annette. And Katie, could you give success stories of, or examples of success stories of beneficial programs or lessons that could be learned to be learned?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that we've learned through our research is that in times like this, the ability to be able to call on people and have that relationship is important. And through these smaller, diverse suppliers, companies are able to create relationships. And so time and time again, we've heard these stories about how these relationships are important. And so I think that's probably the biggest lesson that we've learned.
Thank you so much. And so before we open up to the attendee questions, I just wanted to talk a little bit about legislation. And so what role do you think legislation may play in creating and encouraging opportunities for Black-owned businesses? And Annette, if I can come to you. So again, it's in that, from your experience in this space, what, I guess, what role you feel legislation could play, again, taking into consideration services or, tendering challenges like that?
Yeah, so I think that the journey to equity has to be stick and carrot. It has to be both. It's taken a long time for us to get to where we are. And some of the behaviors and attitudes are so ingrained that we need the legislation to be able to make some real proper and lasting change. So in the work that we're doing with the Great Manchester Tech Collective, we started working on a set of ethnicity standards that would ultimately impact how our partner organisations score supplier bids. And we're starting with the tech sector and currently looking for founder businesses to help ensure that it's robust. But when the organisations realise the benefits of this work, then we'll hold them up as exemplars. So we'll have the stick of the legislation or the stick of the standards and the carrot of being held up as somebody to aspire to. And we could use them as best practice as well.
Thank you so much, Annette. Katie, I'm going to come back to you. And from my understanding, and please, panelists, you are the experts, so you can correct me if I'm wrong, but from my understanding, supplier diversity has made a lot more traction in America compared to in the UK. And so, Katie, do you feel that, or do you feel that this could be attributed to legislation, or do you feel that the United States wouldn't be as far along if the legislation hadn't been in place?
Yeah, I think having the legislation in place has certainly incentivized companies to look to impose these rules onto their suppliers, and to encourage their suppliers to use a second tier supplier that is more diverse. But ultimately, I think it's come down to the companies. So the companies that have really embraced this as something that is good, not only for their corporate social responsibility side of things, but also for their bottom line, and then pass that down in the rules that they apply to their suppliers, have been the most successful. But had there not been the legislative pressures, but then also, the social pressures that come from both, maybe people that they want to recruit, but also from their customers, I think that that none of this would have received as much traction as it has in the United States. And it's been slow. I mean, you mentioned this before. These initiatives in the United States started, in the 50s with the civil rights movement, and now we're in 2020, and a lot of the things that were being addressed, not to get too political, but back in the 1950s are still things that are, huge obstacles yet today.
Thank you so much, Katie. And one of the things I like that you highlighted, social pressures. We sometimes forget the impact of that, social pressures, and also supporting and affecting change. So thank you. Rebecca, just wanting to sort of continue on in the line of discussion as it relates to legislation. Do you see the need for there to be early adopters leading the way in advance of laws being passed when it comes to sort of this legislation area?
So I think it can be really helpful. And if I reflect on our experience, for example, with pay gap reporting, we already publish our ethnicity pay gap in addition to our gender pay gap. And and because we know legislation will come, but actually we've started to already look at that. And quite often large organizations need to do work around their data to even enable that. But we start to get a sense of how you're actually, what are the questions, what are the categories, what are we trying to talk about as we begin to engage in it. And I think it's hugely helpful if large organizations are willing to step forward and say, yeah, we will do this. And I think that for me, legislation that drives transparency can be really helpful in opening up the conversation and engaging key stakeholders in organisations. Even if the legislation's not yet in force, it really starts a different conversation, and you will find organisations that want to lead on this and want to show that they are committed to doing the right thing, because they understand that it's both a social imperative, but also that there are commercial returns for it.
Thank you so much. So that was a very good ending point, actually, so we can open the floor for discussion. I've seen there's already an eager question there. Okay, thank you. We do have a question now in the Q&A function. So this is for all the panelists. During these strange and uncertain times, which is the tagline of 2020, how do you think businesses that haven't considered the importance of an inclusive supplier program might begin their journey? And I would like to ask Annette to answer this question first, please.
So I think, as Rebecca said, I think start off by looking at your own suppliers and starting there. So who is it that's supplying you? Are their suppliers actually diverse? Do they have something in place? Because that might be the place that you're able to get traction really quickly, while you're putting in something that's more robust for yourself. So that's where I would start.
Thank you. And Rebecca, would you like to, do you want me to repeat the question, or would you like to?
No, yeah, I think, so one thing that I think has been really helpful for us has been a focus on buying social, and really starting with social enterprise. There's a lot of diversity in the founders of social enterprises, and there's a real opportunity to engage with social enterprises to look at specific things that they're offering, and they can be things that are quite small for you as an organisation. But we actually looked at a lot of the things that we have, such as the soap that we have in our washrooms, for example, who supplies gifts that we might give to people, or perks that we might offer to our people, and looked at actually where else could some of those things come from. And I think that that's been a really great way to engage with really different people who come into this space with a different orientation, in a way that both has diversified our supply chain but also contributed more broadly. And I think it continues to offer benefits to us. And I think right now, where people are really focused in a positive way, making a step change around purpose and choice, there's a huge opportunity there to be really thoughtful about who we buy from. And I think that it's a space where you can start small as well.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Rebecca. And Katie, would you like to just contribute to that question?
Yeah, just to further echo and amplify what Rebecca said, I think starting small. You don't have to dive in and have a huge initiative to start with. Start small. And another thing that we've found that has been very impactful is talking to your employees. Right now, employee engagement is a huge focus for companies. Reach out to your employees, find out what kinds of diverse suppliers are in the community, and get that community engagement with your company. And the benefit is twofold, because now you have an employee that feels like they've contributed to the purpose and the mission of the company, and you're working with a diverse supplier.
Thank you for that. Employee engagement is always something that I think people forget. You sort of think your employees are there, and you forget to maybe have that sort of full engagement and get them make them feel empowered by getting more involved in the conversations that are related to the organization. Before I ask another question, I would actually like to ask the panelists if they could maybe share their key take-home messages around this topic and in this area. That will probably also help get some more questions coming through. I'd like to start, it's always just, who do I pick? Maybe I would start with Katie, actually, if you don't mind. If you just maybe let us share your key take-home messages.
So my key takeaways are for companies to establish a seat at the table. This function needs to sit within procurement. They need to be able to influence supply chain decisions. From what we've seen, the companies who have created that position at the table have been the most successful and have been able to get the most bang for their buck, if you will. And then that further increases the buy-in, both internally and externally.
Thank you so much, Katie. Rebecca?
Yeah, I think my two big takeaways are, if you are serious as an organisation about diversity and inclusion, that extends to where you spend your money as well as what's going on inside your organisation in terms of your people. And start small. You know, great journeys start with a first step. So to start where you can.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. And Annette?
I would say that when looking for suppliers, kind of open up the net wider than the usual suspects, make it easier for smaller suppliers to work with you. And if this isn't possible in the short term, make it a requirement that your current suppliers pull diversity through their supply chain. If the willingness is there, and we can be creative and we can make changes really quickly if we want to.
Thank you so much. That's really powerful take-home messages. I'm going to be very cheeky and take advantage of being the moderator and ask my own question, if you don't. My question is really, and it's highlighting, it's sort of bringing everything that you've all discussed in today's discussion, which is, what do you think it's going to take for businesses to make this more of a priority and invest in suppliers? I said the question, I said it and didn't ask. Let's see, could we, Annette, do you maybe want to start us off?
Yeah. So I've kind of been banging the drum about this for a little while as chair of the Co-ops Network for BAME colleagues, and also in the business. So one of the things that we've been doing and that I've kind of focused on is changing the narrative and really focusing on the benefits of diversity. There's benefits for the organization, there's benefits all around, and changing the conversation from the right thing to do, something fluffy, to let's talk about the tangible business benefits, and getting the exec bought into that. And doing that has seemed to have helped.
Lovely, thank you so much. And Katie, do you mind just providing your insight as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Just to echo everything that Annette just said, you have to get the attention of the people at the top. Being able to show real, tangible, on paper benefits of these programs, I think, that's, stick to the facts. That's where you're going to get the engagement. I think maybe it's not a bad reputation, but I think for so long, diversity and inclusion in organizations has been, like you said, so fluffy that getting beyond that, I think is a huge challenge. And once organizations are able to get beyond that and really get the attention of those at the top, that's when real change is going to happen.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Katie. And Rebecca, if you'd like to share your thoughts.
Yeah, I think the focus from leadership and the understanding from leadership that this is something that matters is where you're trying to get to. But if I think about diversity and inclusion more broadly, it's really interesting because different people are motivated by different things. So for some people, it will be the business case that makes them really focus. For others, it will be something around social justice and recognizing that we need to level the playing field. And I think we're at a real moment in time that we can harness around that. And for some people, it's really personal. all the first CEOs who signed up to the 30% club had daughters who'd entered the workplace. And for the first time, it was personal. So I think actually when you're working in engaging leaders around it, you have to be thinking quite broadly about what's really going to make the penny drop, because it's rarely one thing, it's usually a combination. But I totally agree, really getting leadership to see this as an imperative is where you're trying to get to.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. We have a question from James Porter. James, thank you so much for your question. I'm just going to read it verbatim. So he says, some or most of the hurdles discussed that need to be addressed are systemic and exist because majorities, in brackets, current leaders, current leaders often have a vested interest in maintaining the status quo. How do you think such systemic issues should be overcome? Is it by trying to overhaul the entire system and demanding instant change? Or is it more gradual? Is it a more gradual process of education and evolution more suitable? Is that approach more suitable? So I keep nodding because you can tell I'm still not entirely used to the virtual. I was looking at Katie, but obviously you can't see I'm looking at you. Katie, do you?
I feel like that's such a loaded question.
I know.
Obviously, I think, it's going to take slow and gradual change to get there. But ultimately, at the end of the day, it's going to take someone in your organization beating that drum and being the squeaky wheel to really address, that comfort level, if you will, at the top of keeping things status quo. No organization is going to be able to make, sweep changes. It's just, it's not realistic. But being that person who is willing to kind of, be that squeaky wheel, I think, that's what's going to drive change. And it's going to be uncomfortable, but that's what it's going to take.
Thank you so much, Katie. And thank you for highlighting that change is not always the most comfortable thing to go through. That uncomfortable element, people don't really tap into that before they start their change process. Rebecca, do you have any comments to that question?
Yeah, I'd agree with Katie. I don't think it's either or. If I look at what we and lots of organisations have done around internal diversity and the diversity of our talent makeup, for example, it's a combination of building inclusive behaviour amongst people and helping them understand their own biases, while at the same time having things like targets that really kind of push on some of those levers that you need within organisations. And I'd anticipate that if we're really going to see change around things like supplier diversity, you're going to need to look at that kind of blended approach, where we're building the skills and the understanding of buyers about where their biases might be, contributing to systemic barriers, while at the same time, using things like transparency to really drive a focus. And I think that blended approach is what drives cultures to evolve.
Annette, do you have comments or things to add for that question?
Yeah, I agree that it's a combination. Well, it's a long process, but I do think that there are decisions that can be made more immediately to start to make that change more concrete. You can make a commitment, you can commit to collecting the data so that you can have measures and you can see whether or not you're actually making progress. So I think it really is a bit of both. There are things that you can start with in terms of getting the exec bought in and getting people being more vocal and making other people comfortable with being able to have the conversation. That really do help.
Thank you so much. So I'm going to draw the meeting to a close. We've answered all the questions and it's been such a great discussion. And firstly, I'd like to say thank you to Anita, Katie and Rebecca. Thank you not only for your time, but thank you for your expertise and for sharing that with us today. It's really much appreciated.